Starlink Battle for Atlas makes a very good first impression on Nintendo Switch. It's jaw-droppingly gorgeous, ambitious with an entire solar system to explore, and hey, the entire Star Fox gang is here too for whatever reason. But does that first impression hold true for the rest of the adventure? And is it worth picking up as a Star Fox fan? Well, we'll get to all of that soon enough. So in Starlink, your primary objective is to prevent the Forgotten Legion from spreading and taking over the planets of the Atlas star system, as well as stopping their leader, Grex, from getting a stranglehold of some powerful ancient technology. So it sounds pretty simple, right? Well, think again, because despite being positioned as a Toys to Life game, there is a surprising amount of complexity for what's purportedly a children's game. Because even though Starlink is fundamentally an action-adventure, it does feature some elements closer to that of a strategy game. Atlas is an active, dynamic universe where the situation can and will change on a per-planet basis, even while you're off exploring somewhere else. And that's where the Alliance rating comes in, which helps you track your progress by revealing what portion of each planet you control versus the Forgotten Legion. To gain control, you'll have to befriend the few existing outposts, as well as build a bunch of your own at any of the predetermined build sites. And there's a few different types of outposts that you can build. Observatories reveal key planet locations on your map, refineries provide a regular source of income on a set schedule, workshops craft mods to upgrade your ships, and armories defend the planet even when you're away. Which is pretty important so that all of your hard work isn't done when you're not looking. Of course, none of this comes free, and outposts are an investment which you can even upgrade. And each one requires different amounts of Electrum being the game's main currency, as well as Nova, which is a highly limited resource. And some, like the Armory, even require a specific Alliance rating. So it should be pretty clear by now that this isn't your typical action-adventure, as it requires foresight and planning in order to best manage your limited resources and pinpoint your attacks. And speaking of attacks, that brings us to the other half of the Alliance rating equation, taking on the Legion's forces directly to reduce their presence. And that too is a multi-layered process full of interconnected systems. There's the troops you'll randomly encounter, which come by way of the numerous extractors on each planet, which themselves are planted by lumbering robot beasts called primes, that in turn are supplied by the dreadnoughts patrolling the planetary region. So you might think that this would warrant a top-down battle plan. Target the dreadnoughts in space first, then the primes, before going after the extractors to cut each one off at the source. Except there's a catch. Each one is powered by the ones below it in rank, meaning it's usually best to start at the bottom and work your way up. Especially since the primes and dreadnoughts won't be marked on your map until you've taken down a set number of the units powering them. But since there's a chance more primes and extractors could be planted in the time that you take to destroy the others, it can be a tough balancing act in determining where to draw the line. So yeah, it can all be a lot to take in. Especially since Starlink takes its sweet time explaining how all of these systems work, and even then, not especially well. There were moments where I was off performing tasks for reasons that wouldn't become entirely clear until much later, which could be frustrating as it felt a little aimless at times, at least until everything eventually fell into place. Regardless, it's an intricate hierarchical system that's incredibly interesting as a concept, the reality of which isn't quite as exciting however, but that's more due to the problems inherent to the game's overall repetitive design. To step back for a moment, each of Atlas's 7 worlds looks unique, with a distinctive color palette, cloud formations, and even some darn cool looking fauna. The planets are all incredibly beautiful and distinct, but it's a distinction that only runs skin deep, because mechanically, each world might as well be interchangeable with any other, as you'll be performing the exact same actions and tasks over and over and over again on each one. Whether it's simple fetch quests for the outposts, exploring similar looking ruins, solving simple tower puzzles, fighting gangs of enemies, or taking down extractors. And the extractors are perhaps the biggest offender here, as there are dozens upon dozens of them. And yet, the basic solution is almost always the same. Take out all the enemies or the nodes to reveal the core, then go in for the kill. It's exciting, until it isn't, which was probably around number 5 of the 30 I had destroyed by the end of the game. To compound the issue is the fact that the combat itself isn't terribly engaging, whether in space or on the ground. Oddly, in Starlink, whenever you're on a planet doing most anything of note, it'll likely be with your flight engine turned off, which makes the game feel like more of a third-person shooter where you can strafe and even jump around, which even after 20 hours or so, still looks a little bit goofy to me. There just isn't much depth to it, even with the ability to hot swap pilots, vehicles, and weapons, some of which, to be fair, do feel rather unique. I grew rather fond of the Meteor MK2, which after a quick charge, lets you use your vehicle as a battering ram. Oh yeah. But most battles just evolved into circle strafing and jumping while laying into the enemy, with the actual setting of the battle itself rarely playing a factor. I will, however, give props to the Prime battles, which are genuinely fun and engaging. They feature multiple phases, are highly dynamic, especially with them running away at some point, and you're actually encouraged to use your flight ability, which helps mix it up. I just wish more of the game's battles were this exciting, and that unfortunately goes for space too. Because I found the space battles to be a bit of a mess, where you're often overwhelmed by enemies to the point that's not even clear where you're taking fire from. Look at all those arrows, it's chaos! After taking heavy damage, there isn't much recourse beyond rolling repeatedly and praying you don't get hit further, or hiding within the crevices of a nearby structure until your shields recharge. And to top it off, the flight controls just aren't that satisfying to use, as they lack the ability to pull off high-speed, tight maneuvers that I'm used to in action games, with it instead feeling, again, a bit like a third-person shooter. It's actually the quieter, less pivotal moments I found to be the most enjoyable. Casually flying through space to wherever I may end up reminded me a bit of sailing the ocean in Wind Waker, especially with the long distances involved and how beautiful it looked. And I especially liked how the game handled hyperdrive, where you still have some control in order to evade hazards like asteroids or outlaw traps. And I really can't stress enough how freaking cool it is they can leave a planet at any time, fly to another, and choose exactly where to land, all in a completely seamless process.
Kareet, here I come.
It never failed to impress. I just wish there were more of interest to do once you landed, because once you've seen one planet, you've basically seen them all, at least in terms of content. But Starlink's presentation in general is fantastic. The cutscenes are well produced, the voice acting is generally on point, and the graphics, good god are they good! I don't know how Ubisoft pulled off what they did on the Nintendo Switch, but I'm sure glad they did, because this game is gorgeous at times. I mean, look at that! And that! And that! It really is jaw-dropping. Okay, now one thing that I haven't really talked about much yet is that Starlink is technically a Toys to Life game, in the sense that you can plug a physical pilot and ship into a specialized controller mount and then choose which weapons to add onto it. And I haven't talked much about it yet for good reason, because it's entirely possible to play and beat the game without needing any toys at all, if you buy the game digitally, and that was actually my preferred way of playing. While the toys themselves are well designed, and it is kinda neat being able to hot swap the physical parts and seeing that reflected instantly on the screen, the reality is that it's a lot more cumbersome than just quickly selecting the parts you need from a menu. Of course, I say that as a man in his 30s and not a kid, so clearly your mileage may vary. But then there's a price issue, in which the base digital version is actually cheaper than the physical standard kit, despite coming with more content. Now, while it should theoretically be possible to play with a standard kit without having to purchase additional accessories, that may not quite be the case for two reasons. One, some enemies might demand particular weapon types that the standard kit just doesn't come with. And two, there's a little fact that, because the ships essentially act as your lives, you'll only have the two that the starter kit comes with, making the game more difficult unless you purchase more. Finally, there's the Star Fox content, which again is obviously exclusive to the Switch version of the game. And not only can you play as him or as Arwing for the entirety of the main story, but he also has an entirely separate set of missions that you can swap to at any time. And I have to say, I kinda love how Star Fox is added to the game. It's fun to see how he and the rest of the gang interact with people and circumstances outside of their usual.
You're alright, pal, even though you got a puny ship.
Our ships are the same size. Math isn't your thing, is it?
And believe me, there are some truly great lines delivered by the on-point voice acting. Oh, and Fox's special pilot ability is literally called Rock and Roll.
Let's rock and roll!
Which in this case summons a fellow Star Fox member to help out, all to the tune of Corneria from the original Star Fox and Super Nintendo.
Star Fox, form up on me!
This is Peppy. All systems go.
How great is that? The Arwing is also fun to play as, and even retains its blasters as a default weapon. Now, because Starlink was already well into development before Star Fox was even up for consideration, you can sometimes almost see the bolts holding him in place, such as a few cutscenes that were extended on either end to slip Fox and the gang in, or others where they just kind of awkwardly hang out in the background. And oddly, the story seems to forget about them entirely during the midpoint of the adventure, where they're missing from the cutscenes entirely, despite the fact that Fox is pivotal at every key moment, since I was, playing as him. Finally, there's a special quest line that revolves around finding Starwolf, which again exists entirely independently of the main game, allowing you to pursue them at any time. And they're pretty cool. Appropriately, they're a little more action-focused than a lot of the main side quests, but do keep in mind that this is still Starlink, and it is very much not a Star Fox game. So if that's what you came here looking for, I would probably look elsewhere unless Starlink already appeals to you on some level. especially since all of the Star Wolf content adds up to maybe an hour or so of playtime. And that might be a good note to end this review on. Starlink is definitely not a Star Fox replacement if that's what you're looking for. It is very much its own game, and what that is something that's ambitious, beautiful, and flawed. I liked Starlink on Nintendo Switch. There's enough novelty in its gameplay systems to offset some of the repetition, and the fact that the game's a looker doesn't hurt too. It just never quite meshes into the cohesive whole that I had hoped it would. And with that, thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more on Starlink and everything else Nintendo too.